Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today. Today, we are going to be talking about liver disease and obesity. My name is Nishaat Patel, and I am a registered dietitian with NutriProCan. And thank you also to Novo Nordisk for sponsoring this event today. So today, we will be talking about the importance of liver health, as well as what can happen if our livers lose function, such as in MASLD. We will also talk about how the foods we eat impact our liver function, including foods to eat more of and those to avoid. We will learn about other lifestyle factors that impact liver health, and we will also set you up with an easy how-to plan to improve your liver health day to day. So what is MASLD? MASLD stands for Metabolic Dysfunction Associated Steatotic Liver Disease. It is the new name for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or fatty liver. So it's different than alcohol-associated liver disease, or ADL. Now, when it comes to the liver is responsible for processing and detoxifying all the substances that we consume: food, fluids, medication, etc. The liver also helps to break down fats and carbohydrates that we eat. However, when the amount of fat and simple sugar intake exceeds what is required by the body, the liver then stores this as fatty tissue. MASLD is when more than 5% of your liver has now become this fatty tissue. So just to put it into context, about 20% of Canadians are affected by MASLD, and the rise in liver disease mimics the rise in obesity, as it is an obesity-related disease. So when we talk about obesity, type 2 diabetes, and MASLD, it is basically a cycle of metabolic dysfunction. So obesity, specifically central or visceral obesity, increases insulin resistance. The excess fatty tissue also releases pro-inflammatory chemicals and free fatty acids. So about 80% of people with obesity have some sort of fat accumulation in their liver. When it comes to type 2 diabetes, the insulin resistance associated with it leads to chronically high blood sugars, and this also promotes that liver fat accumulation. So about 70% of people with type 2 diabetes also have MASLD. And then in MASLD, this excess liver fat contributes to insulin resistance. So it's often undiagnosed in people with obesity and type 2 diabetes. It is now the most common chronic liver condition globally. So early weight management and metabolic control are critical for preventing progression from insulin resistance to type 2 diabetes to MASLD, and then eventually to liver damage, which we want to avoid. So the types of MASLD that we're going to be talking about today are the metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease, which is different from MASLD, which is the metabolic dysfunction and alcohol-associated liver disease. So the first one is the most common liver disease. It's when too much fat is stored in the liver cells, and it tends to affect those who drink little to no alcohol, are overweight or obese with more fatty tissue around their waist, and or have insulin resistance and high blood sugar levels. MASLD, on the other hand, is like MASLD, but in those who also consume alcohol. So it's defined as those who have greater than 140 to 350 grams of alcohol per week for females, and more than 210 to 420 grams per week of alcohol for males. Both of these can then lead to MASH, which is metabolic dysfunction associated steatohepatitis, which is a more serious and often permanent form of the liver disease. So let's look here at the development and the stages of MASLD. So the first, it's simple MASLD. In this stage, there's a buildup of excess fat in the liver, but it's largely harmless if it doesn't progress. If it does progress, it progresses then to steatohepatitis, also known as MASH. So this is where there's been a buildup of excess fat in the liver, which is accompanied by inflammation. The third stage and then moves on to fibrosis. So the fibrosis is persistent inflammation in the liver that has now caused scarring. However, the liver can still generally function as normal. It is still, reversible. The fourth stage is cirrhosis. So this is the stage in which the scarring of the liver has now become so widespread that it is impacting the liver's ability to function normally. So this is the most severe stage and is irreversible. So it's very, very important to address the MASLD in the early stages to prevent the progression to fibrosis and eventually cirrhosis. So now that we understand the stages for MASLD, let's take a look at some of the accompanying symptoms. So often actually causes no symptoms, and this is where the importance of that testing comes in. However, some people may experience fatigue and weakness, especially as it progresses on to the more severe side of things. Weight loss, unintentional weight loss, abdominal discomfort, specifically in this upper right quadrant area. It can be kind of a dull ache that comes and goes. And eventually, as it gets more severe, yellowing of the skin and eyes or jaundice. So if the symptoms aren't super severe, why do we care about liver disease? Well, there's other effects of it. So decreased quantity and quality of life. So for instance, not having the energy levels needed to go about typical daily or usual activities. Limited work capacity related to lack of ability to concentrate for long periods of time. Feelings of being socially isolated or even ashamed of the condition. So this might look like thinking, how could I have let this happen? Nobody really understands, nobody can relate. Increased spending on healthcare and potentially medications needed to treat the symptoms and the condition. And lastly, and most significantly, liver failure. So while there are ways to avoid MASLD and liver failure through lifestyle means, if this condition is left untreated, it eventually progresses and can lead to liver failure. So as you can imagine, we need our liver to help with detoxification and processing of all our foods and beverages and medications, everything that goes through our body, essentially. So preventing it from getting to this stage is so critical. But how do we do that? So before we dive into preventative measures, let's take a look first at how this disease manifests. So there are two factors to consider. One is habits and the other are body factors. So when we talk about habits, things that contribute to getting MASLD are drinking too many sugar sweetened or high sugar beverages. So think about juices, pops, things like that. Consuming a high amount of saturated and trans fats from unhealthy foods such as high fat dairy products, fatty red meat, butter, coconut products, and super processed foods. Eating too many refined carbs in your diet, so white pasta, white like crackers, things like that, really, really refined, low fiber foods. Imbalanced eating habits, such as, waiting too long to eat and then making poor choices, or going all out on the weekends and just eating whatever you feel like it, or not eating proper meals and snacking constantly throughout the day. Lack of exercise or very sedentary lifestyles. And then we look at body factors. So having large amounts of belly fat, also known as visceral fat, obesity, problems with gut health and digestion, insulin resistance, pre-diabetes or diabetes, so issues with blood sugar, and metabolic syndrome. So a collection of things such as high blood pressure, cholesterol, and high blood sugar, large waist circumference, and high lipids in the blood. Many of these often go together. For example, eating too many refined grains on a daily basis can lead to excess belly fat, high blood sugar, and then eventually MASLD. So just things to keep in mind. So let's do a little quiz here to test your knowledge. What can we do about it? Can we prevent or treat MASLD? So A, there is nothing we can do to prevent or treat MASLD. B, medication is the only way to treat MASLD. C, there are many medical options, including surgery. Or D, lifestyle is the only current way to prevent and manage MASLD. So the answer is D, lifestyle. There is no medication to treat MASLD. However, new medications are coming about to treat obesity, or those have been shown to reduce liver fat. But for right now, we know that changing our lifestyle can reverse MASLD, starting with prevention. So the good news is that it is reversible. When we talk about prevention, often we talk about modifiable risk factors. So things that we have control over in our lifestyles. So smoking, unhealthy eating habits, physical inactivity, and overuse of alcohol. There's also risk conditions to consider, such as obesity, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, and high blood glucose levels. And these are often also associated with these lifestyle habits. Early detection is another measure of prevention. So we look at things, essentially with this detection, it allows us to potentially reverse it and or prevent it. So there's 3 primary ways to detect MASLD disease. The first of which is blood work. So with blood work, there are various markers of health that you would look into, including a lipid profile, complete blood count, fasting blood sugars, or your HbA1c, which is a marker of your average blood sugar levels over the last 3 months, and some of your liver enzymes, specifically these 3. So ALT, AST, and GGT. We also look at waist circumference. So this is an important marker of liver health, as that excess abdominal fat is associated with MASLD and other risks such as diabetes. So for men, health risks increase if your waist circumference is more than 102 centimeters or 40 inches. For women, health risks increase if your waist circumference is more than 88 centimeters or 35 inches. And then the last measurement that can be used to detect MASLD is a fibroscan, which is a non-invasive test that can be used to assess your liver health through ultrasound technology. And it'll essentially measure the stiffness and the fatty changes in your liver. Let's move on to another quiz. When it comes to reduced risk of MASLD disease, which dietary pattern is most associated with this? So A, reduced carbohydrate diet, B, low glycemic diet, C, Mediterranean diet, or D, plant-based diet, or E, all of the above. So the answer is E, all of the above. So the reduced carbohydrate diet and low glycemic index diet essentially help to reduce your blood sugar levels and reduce your insulin resistance. The Mediterranean diet and plant-based diet are focused on getting enough vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, plain low-fat dairy products, fish, and it's low in processed foods, red meat, and high-sugar foods. It's also high in omega-3 foods, such as sunflower seeds, avocado, and it's also high in omega-3 foods, such as fatty fish, so think salmon, walnuts, hemp hearts, flax seeds, so on. So not only do these diets help with the prevention of MASLD, but adapting these styles of eating can also help with treatment, management, and or reversing MASLD, which we will dive into in a bit. Okay, so top lifestyle factors for reducing MASLD. So 1, eating a balanced, nutrient-rich, and plant-based diet. 2, the glycemic index, carbohydrates, and blood sugars. 3, hydration. 4, eating mindfully. 5, planning meals and snacks. 6, the avoidance of certain foods. 7, being physically active. 8, weight loss or weight management where appropriate. 9, supplements. And then we'll talk about some additional lifestyle factors to work on as well. All right, so let's start with number 1, a balanced, nutrient-rich, and plant-based diet. So plant-based diet describes a style of eating that is basically emphasizing the inclusion of plant-based foods such as vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds, aiming to eat the rainbow. So by eating various colors of plant-based foods, you'll be receiving the optimal mix of different vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants for your health. However, it is important to note that this doesn't necessarily mean the exclusion of healthy proteins, like lean animal proteins. So excellent sources of protein would be legumes, tofu, low-fat dairy products, fish, and lean poultry. Protein is fundamental to help support your physical activity efforts, to help keep you feeling full and satiated between your meals, and may even help in weight loss. Another component of adapting the style of eating is the inclusion of high fiber foods. So not only does fiber keep you full between meals and keep your digestive systems healthy, but it also helps your liver to work at an optimal level. So you can accomplish this by selecting foods from all food groups, such as fruits and vegetables and whole grains, nuts and seeds, potentially even adding in fiber supplements if you need to. The goal is to aim for about 30 grams of fiber per day. Now, let's look at the next slide to review a couple more principles of following a plant-based diet. When we talk about eating foods with additional functions, what does this mean? Well, plant-based foods are rich in something called phytochemicals, which are powerful antioxidants that destroy free radicals. Free radicals are basically these nasty molecules that react with body tissues and may result in the formation of things like cancer, cardiovascular disease, eye disease, etc. Spices and herbs are included in the list of foods to eat with additional function. Not only are they incredible ways to add some flavor to your meals, but they also have specific effects on your bodies. For example, cinnamon can add a little bit of spice and sweetness to things like oatmeal or yogurt, but it also helps to moderate blood sugar levels. Turmeric acts as an antioxidant and anti-inflammatory, so it may help in managing the inflammation associated with MASLD. Next, fermented foods and probiotics have additional benefits that can help our digestive systems through optimizing our gut health and reducing cholesterol levels. So by balancing the fat levels in our body, it may in turn help prevent or manage the onsets of MASLD. So great foods to include to get these extra benefits would be low-fat dairy products with probiotic cultures, such as low-fat yogurt and kefir, and other fermented foods such as kimchi and sauerkraut. So great things to add on to your plate. The second point that we will look at in terms of lifestyle factors includes blood sugars, insulin resistance, and the low glycemic diet. So when we talk about blood sugars, right, when our blood sugars start to increase and we become more insulin resistant, our bodies can no longer utilize the excess sugar in our body. This results in that excess sugar being stored as fat in the liver. Over time, this accumulation can lead to MASLD. So one way in which we can help with this is lowering the carbohydrate intake and the intake of high glycemic index foods in our diet, which we will talk about in more detail. A low carbohydrate diet encourages you to keep your carbs about 50% or less of your calorie intake. A low glycemic index includes choosing foods that are listed as 50 or lower in the glycemic index, which I will show you on the next slide. Alrighty, so when we look at this graph here and the ranking of the foods on the right-hand side, so foods here are ranked from high glycemic index or high GI to lower GI. You'll see at the top, the high GI foods are the ones that are more processed, more refined, things like white bread and donuts, but can also include things like watermelon. These foods tend to cause a large spike in our blood sugar, followed by steep decline, so this red line here on the graph. On the other hand, low glycemic index foods, so things such as legumes, chickpeas, beans, for example, have a low glycemic index, so they have a much more steady increase in the blood sugar, followed by a steady decline. So, like I said, the low GI diet is aiming for 50 and below. Okay, so let's move on to hydration. When we talk about hydration, of course, it's simple. You know, we know that drinking lots of water prevents dehydration. We all know that. But it also really does help our liver to function better. Water essentially helps with the detoxification process that the liver does naturally. And when dehydration is occurring, it reduces the effectiveness and the efficacy of the liver by slowing down this filtering step in the detoxification process. So how much water you need will depend on many different factors such as gender, body size, perspiration, but about 2 to 3 liters per day is pretty much good for most of us. Mindful eating is another important aspect. So that includes slowing down, taking time to chew your food, listening to your body so that you can identify when you're hungry, when you're full, when you're satiated, differentiating between hunger and appetite, tasting your food. So this is really important as well to prevent you from overeating. Grocery shopping and meal planning are really important factors when it comes to being able to eat healthy, because if you aren't able to prepare, it's going to be really hard to execute these principles. So when it comes to grocery shopping, some tips are making a list ahead of time. So making sure you are, going in with intentional shopping. You're not kind of impulse buying, having a snack before you go, so you're not going in hungry. Starting off your shop in the produce section and the outer portion of the grocery store, as that's where the most whole foods are, and also buying pre-sliced and portioned foods such as pre-sliced fruits and vegetables, just to make things a little bit easier. Meal planning and prep is also super important. So picking a day, any day of the week to do your meal prep, setting aside a couple of hours to do things like chopping vegetables and maybe batch prepping a meal that you can eat for lunches during the week. Making your own fast food. So instead of ordering out, maybe you make homemade burgers and you use more vegetables and you use, like a ground turkey patty, for example, whole grain bun. Packing your lunch while you're making dinner. So, throw in an extra portion in a Tupperware, put it in the fridge, you have lunch the next day. Buying pre-prepped foods such as, frozen fruits and vegetables. And buying a slow cooker is really a great hack that we often share with a lot of our clients to help make things easy. So you put your ingredients into the slow cooker in the morning, turn it on, go about your day, you come back, you have a warm meal ready to go. If you are interested in learning more about healthy eating, feel free to jump onto our website and check out our courses. So when we talk about unhealthy eating and the prevalence of unhealthy eating in Canada, we see that the number is actually quite high. So about 60% of Canadians are eating not great. More than half of Canadians consume fruits and vegetables less than 5 times per day. And we know fruit and vegetable consumption reduces the risk of most chronic diseases. We also see that it's highest in adults aged 50 to 64 with a higher prevalence in men. So now that we've talked about, what kind of things we want to have, we also want to talk about what foods we should be avoiding. So foods that are high in unhealthy fat. So we've talked about that: fatty red meat, coconut oil, milk, butter, high fat dairy products. High glycemic foods, so things containing sugars such as white bread, white pasta. Limiting fructose intake is also important, what I'll talk about a little bit later. Processed grains, white bread, crackers, pasta, rice should also be limited, as they act as that kind of higher glycemic carb in our body. Staying away from a lot of fried foods, including fast food and restaurant meals. Bacteria in raw and undercooked shellfish, such as oysters and clams. Be careful with those, as those with liver disease are at greater risk of severe illness from these bacteria. And lastly, avoiding alcohol. So depending on the state of your liver, you should avoid alcohol. If you are allowed to drink alcohol, limit it to no more than 1 drink a day if you are female and 2 drinks a day if you are male. So just a little bit more on carbohydrates here. When we talk about carbs, not all carbs are equal. Some are worse for your liver than others, such as fructose. So fructose causes the liver to produce more fat, and then the insulin resistance will worsen the MASLD. So this comes from things such as high fructose corn syrup, which is in a lot of processed foods, fruit juices, soft drinks, dried fruit, honey, and table sugar. We've talked about the high glycemic index carbohydrates that we should be avoiding. And so this really highlights the importance of reading nutrition labels so you can overall limit your sugar intake. Physical activity is another really important aspect of prevention. So when we talk about physical activity, we're referring to at least 3.5 hours of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week in order to help us increase fatty acid oxidation, decrease fatty acid synthesis, and reducing damage to the liver. This is really important to note because about 75% of adults 35 plus in Canada are inactive. So it is something that is something that we need to address. When it comes to weight management, it is important to note that there is such a thing as overweight and metabolically healthy. It's really the central obesity that we're worried about more, so around the middle. And we also know that a BMI over 30 is associated with increased risk of all chronic disease, including MASLD. The lowest rates of the chronic disease, including MASLD, are seen in BMI between 18.5 to 24.9. So we know that the prevalence of obesity is also quite up there, and it's highest in adults aged 35 to 64. So if applicable for you, aim for a weight loss of about 5 to 10% to see a reduction in risk. Let's do a little quiz here to test your knowledge on supplements. So which dietary supplement has been shown to help prevent and reverse liver disease? So A, vitamin C, B, resveratrol, or C, omega-3? C, omega-3. So omega-3 is powerful in reducing and preventing liver inflammation. It can also help to reduce liver fat, and it is generally a good anti-inflammatory component, even for things such as heart health and general inflammation. Some things to keep in mind when it comes to supplements are benefits versus risks, costs, regulation of supplements in Canada and elsewhere, treatment versus prevention, drug interactions. So if you're taking any medications, be careful, and dietary intake. You may not actually need supplements, but if your dietary intake is low in a specific vitamin or nutrient, it might be helpful to supplement. So really important here to speak to a healthcare professional because it may not be appropriate for everyone. So a dietitian or a physician can help you with this. Some other lifestyle habits to focus on is smoking. So avoiding smoking if you are doing it, trying to quit or reduce, avoiding alcohol like we talked about, focusing on social connections and prioritizing them, getting enough sleep so that the liver and your organs in general can, recover and repair, and managing your stress. So trying calming activities, whether it's going on a walk or meditating or whatever works for you. So now that we understand the theory of it, how do we kind of put it into practice? So this is a bit of a sample meal plan that we have put together. So for breakfast, you could start off with some avocado toast. So whole grain slice of toast, which is low glycemic index, avocado, which is high in vitamin E and healthy fats, tomato for some antioxidants and a little bit of fiber, same as with the avocado and toast, and an egg for some protein and some extra vitamins. For lunch, you could do a rainbow bowl, so with low glycemic index carbs such as quinoa, plenty of fiber and phytonutrients from the cabbage, kale, parsley, and cilantro, and black beans, which also gives you some protein, and then an anti-inflammatory dressing with lemon juice, turmeric, tahini, olive oil, cayenne pepper. For dinner, you could do a beet salad, so mixed greens with some roasted beets, some walnuts to help get you some healthy fats and some omega-3s. Beets are also quite cool in that they help with blood flow and circulation and reduce our bad cholesterol. You can also top it up with some balsamic vinegar for a nice low-calorie flavoring agent, some baked salmon for its protein and omega-3, again, really helping with that inflammation in the liver, and a garnish of wild rice, so another low glycemic index carbohydrate, pairing it with some delicious non-starchy vegetables such as steamed cauliflower and asparagus. For snacks in between meals when needed, fantastic options for MASLD would be edamame pods, so protein, fiber, baby carrots and red peppers with some hummus, yogurt for some probiotics, some protein, cocoa powder and berries for some antioxidants and fiber. You could also do whole grain crackers, such as Mary's crackers, with some nutritious healthy fats, such as hummus or guacamole. So these are all great combos for whole, natural, and well-balanced snacks and meals through the day. So while we recommend doing most of your cooking at home, we know that it's not always possible, and it's also important to be able to navigate eating out, including social eating, restaurant eating. So let's look at how to navigate some of those situations. So one tip would be checking out the menu beforehand online. Is there nutrition information available? Could you maybe compare and contrast between dishes? So what has more fiber? What has less sugar? What has more protein? Asking for sauces on the side or not at all. Sauces can really amp up the calories, the fats, the sugars. So minimizing these is a good idea. Asking for oil and vinegar as a salad dressing. Asking for food not to be salted. So excess sodium can also put some extra stress on the liver. So we don't want to have too much sodium. Asking for olive oil, healthier fats instead of butter in cooking. Asking for items to be baked instead of fried. Swapping out fries for a salad as well to get some antioxidants, some fiber, some plant-based eating. So to wrap up, some key takeaways from today is that MASLD is often a silent and progressive disease. Lifestyle modification and nutrition are the first line of defense. So if you have obesity and blood sugar imbalances, to address those. Increasing your intake of plant-based foods, such as fruits and vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, is a great way to improve your nutrition. Reducing the intake of processed foods and trying to make most of your meals at home. Get moving, trying to be as physically active as you can. Supplement where appropriate, and speak with a medical professional for any testing and treatment options. If you're interested in more personalized support, you are welcome to book in a complimentary 15-minute consultation with one of our dietitians to discuss your health concerns and goals. The Canadian Digestive Health Foundation also has a great blog post on MASLD, so be sure to check that out. And if you need more help, you can jump onto our website as well. We have a program designed along with Liver Care Specialist, which has helped a lot of our clients to help manage and reverse MASLD. So thank you so much for joining me today. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions or feedback. And hopefully you are well on your journey to preventing and managing MASLD.